The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the Our Culture, Our Stories podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of the NAACP or any affiliated organizations.
I couldn't get a decent part in university theater. And then when a part did come up that I thought I could play, the director told me that, no pun intended, but I would color the role, at which point, I was a junior in college, at which point I just said, well, then I'm done here. There were lots of moments for me as a young actor coming up where I had to advocate for myself, where I had to be clear what I wanted and what I didn't want. And those were the kinds of things we were trying to impart to these young students in Inside the Black Box.
The NAACP Image Awards celebrates the progress and advancement of people of color in society and entertainment while highlighting the path forward for us. You as a celebrated legend, in your opinion, why are the NAACP Image Awards so special when it compares to all of the other award shows?
Well, I mean, I think in very many ways, like the other award shows, what we're talking about is community. In this case, we're talking about a community of Black folk who have either written a book or made a movie or play an instrument or whatever it might be. And to come into that kind of room or come into that kind of community and be celebrating each other, I think is the reason the award is so important. I remember back years ago, they may still do it today, there was an award for Black actors who either were or were not, in many cases, nominated for Oscars. And we would meet on the same night as the Oscars. There would be an award ceremony, and people would talk about, since we weren't invited over there, we were invited over here.
That is amazing. And do you recall how long did that go on that you would meet?
I know it went on for several years. I've been to at least 2 or 3 of those, but again, it was many, many years ago. I just thought it was a great idea. It was lovely to be in a room full of Black actors and actresses and have us not only sort of communing, if you will, with one another, but accepting awards based on what we had done that particular year, and not necessarily, I mean, again, not necessarily to talk about who's best or who's not best, but to talk about the fact that we had accomplished whatever we accomplished that year as artists.
That's fantastic. With the Image Awards specifically, can you take us back to the moment when you found out you were nominated for your first Image Award, or a particular Image Award that meant a lot with everything that you've been doing?
I don't exactly remember the very first time, but I do remember being invited to the NAACP Image Awards. It was among the very first times I'd been there. Nancy Wilson was there, along with not Patti LaBelle, and Patti LaBelle, and they were sitting a couple of rows ahead of me, and I was, dressed in my tux and whatever, and that may have been the very first time I went to an Image Award, looking around at who was there, saying hello to people that I knew or didn't know, and the next thing I knew, Patti LaBelle and Nancy Wilson came up to me, and they were so excited to see me. I just thought, all right, see, now the evening for me is over. I should just go home, and that's my award for the night.
I can only imagine what that must have felt like.
It was great. It was fantastic. I mean, Nancy Wilson, nothing against Patti LaBelle, but Nancy, I'm a jazz, I follow jazz. So for Nancy Wilson to come up to me and recognize who I was, and then compliment me on my work, I was in heaven.
Okay, let's talk about that. The impact of your work had people that you regard as legends and icons themselves coming up to you. And I know that you're aware of the impact that film and television has on shaping societal perceptions of Black people, Black men. When was the first time that you were aware that you were making an impact with your work. You've spoken before on how intentional you like to be with the choices that you make and things that you, and I would presume that that's because you're aware of the power of the images that you and the rest of us put out when we're connecting with people. So can you talk about when you first became aware? Was that the moment, or was there another moment? The moment with Nancy
that was
and
one of
Hattie?
those moments. I think, the Oscar award evenings that I was talking about earlier happened, I think, probably around the time I had just done Brother from Another Planet. And to be recognized for that particular film and see what its effect was, which was really interesting, because I think our community at first thought that Brother from Another Planet was a black exploitation film, until, of course, you actually saw it and realized, no, it was not. But I think the fact that it spoke to and about black people in this world who have talent and no place to sort of use that talent, who have skills and no place to use that skills, I thought, yes, made a real impact. And to some extent, yes, I was surprised, because you don't know. We do all these things. You have no idea how people are going to respond to them or not, and that just was very surprising and lovely. Just the fact that what it really meant, I guess, was that we are looking at one another's work. We are sort of in tune with what the rest of us are doing, and that we are not doing it as separate islands, as if you will.
Oh, most definitely. So let's talk about the work as it's being done for a moment. And what I mean by that is, as you did Brother from Another Planet and the number of TV series, films, and all those sorts of things, have there been sets where you felt particularly safe, seen as a black man, valued? A lot of times we hear about situations, say, especially like with black actors and hair, people not knowing how to do black hair, or the makeup not matching the skin and seeming to have to fend for yourself and all those sorts of things, or people having certain things in scripts that may not jive well with how you're comfortable seeing yourself viewed. What have you had experiences that were particularly good where you felt safe and seen as a black man?
Doing Equal Justice with Thomas Carter for ABC was fantastic. To talk about feeling safe, to work with Thomas was just a real wonderful, instructive, artistic experience. To be the lead on a major television show, and have someone like Thomas who could protect us, protect me in particular, because when we all auditioned for that show, Thomas wasn't sure whether he was going to give me the lead or the second lead. It was between me and Carter Smith. Carter Smith is a white actor, and Thomas wasn't sure which we auditioned together and switched roles, and Thomas wasn't sure which role he wanted to give who. And his major concern, interestingly enough, was if he hires a black man to do the lead, the audience will perceive the series as a black series. And he was concerned that would hurt, oddly enough, the series. He chose to give me the lead. We did really well for, I think, a season and a half. And then ABC took us off the air. They took us and 30-something and one other show, China Beach or whatever it was called, because they decided that ensemble dramas were too expensive and it was easier to do reality shows.
Yes, we all recall the changing of the guard in that way. And I'll leave that there. What has been some of your favorite roles to play and why?
If I go back as far as Brother from Another Planet, that was just a real gem to play that character and not have the ability to speak and then yet still tell that story was fantastic. And working with John Sayles was fantastic. Equal Justice with Thomas Carter, to be a lead in a legal show talking about justice on TV. That character, very close to me. Eureka, the character I played in Eureka. You know, when I was given that character, he was meant to be like a third or fourth kind of guy down the line. And I decided he was someone who anything was possible. Anything and everything was possible. And so, as one of the producers said, I kind of was doing my own little show in the middle of that show. And it paid off. It paid off in that I would get letters from parents, black parents, who were excited by the fact that here was a black man playing a scientist of the kind of, doing the kind of science that I was doing. And now these kids, these black children, wanted to be scientists. And I just thought, we were talking about impact before. I just thought that was just a wonderful thing. Terminator 2. Again, big surprise. I remember when that movie opened, I was in LA, 3rd Street Promenade, walking back to my car or to a restaurant, I don't remember which, but all these kids came out of the restaurant and were excited about my death scene in Terminator 2. I felt like I was then, in the moment as they were talking about it, like I was in an old 1950s movie where people were saying, "Oh, love the way you died." But it became a thing. Everybody talked about that scene. So that just made it, you know, that much more interesting, fun, and important. And then finally, I guess, almost without exception in a way, to play Rowan in Scandal was a gift that I will always be grateful for. Shonda made it possible for me to sort of, when I was offered the role, that wasn't clear that that's where we were going. And once she started writing those monologues, I felt like, because I was on my way, when I first got that part, I was actually on my way to do Romeo and Juliet on Broadway in New York. And she said, no, you can't go away. So in writing these monologues, she gave me the opportunity to be both theatrical, as if I was doing a play, and yet at the same time being on the screen. And it was one of the most amazing experiences I've had as an actor. And then finally, Turn Me Loose off Broadway to play Dick Gregory was a mind-blowing experience.
Look, I want to go back to Rowan Pope for a moment and talk to you about how important it is for Black creatives to have the opportunity to play to the spectrum of characters, of good to evil, layered. That particular character, I thought, was a watershed moment, not only because your monologues were just delivered with the most pristine and enjoyable performance, but many times Black actors and actresses, while they may be cast in roles that are stereotypical, that are negative images, it is still important for us to be able to play the villain. And isn't it fun to play the villain at times?
Oh, can you talk? Absolutely. I mean,
can you talk about
admittedly,
that?
I spent most of my career doing playing good guys, and that was mostly because the era in which I was coming up through as an actor, bad guys were drug dealers and pimps and people I just were not interested in playing, unless, of course, you wrote it in such a way that it actually had some relevance to something other than look at the black man sort of taking care of, dealing with these women or selling these drugs. So when Scandal came along, I actually had gone out to LA looking for a really smart bad guy. And this, without it landed in my lap. I was in LA. I had not yet seen Scandal. I watched the first season on my computer. And I was going to call my agent and say, listen, I just saw the series. It looks fantastic. Maybe we can call them up and work something out. I could do a 6-episode stretch or whatever. Before I made that call, my agents called me and said, ABC just called and they're interested in talking to you about Scandal. So, and that conversation was all about, at the end of season 2, it will be clear that you are her dad, at which point I said, you had me at her dad. So that was just extraordinary.
I remember seeing you get the Emmy for Rowan Pope and was so extremely proud knowing where you had come from. And do we have another smart bad guy coming up? Because nobody.
I'd love to do I'd love to do another smart bad guy. So far it's not on anybody's radar, but now that we're doing this, if anybody sees it and you've got a really smart bad guy you need somebody to play, call me. And by the way, it's Eli Pope and Rowan. It's not Rowan Pope. People always say that it's Rowan Pope. It was never Rowan Pope. It was always Eli Pope, which was the guy who worked at the museum, and Rowan, who was the guy who was running the country.
Okay, now thank you for clarifying that, because there's a ton of Scandal fans that are going to appreciate we really will. Let's go on and talk a little bit more about Inside the Black Box. When we were talking about, you mentioned how the NAACP Image Awards, or the celebration that the community of Black actors will have for themselves. That's community. Was it in your goals and objectives within the Black Box to take this community to another level? Because that's what I felt like I was watching community in action while watching Inside the Black Box. Can you talk about that and how what you want people to get out of seeing Inside the Black Box, seeing the people that you had there, the young actors doing the improv as well? It wasn't just another talk show about people's journeys. So please, more about that.
Well, first of all, I have to say Tracy Moore was the one who originated the idea of Inside the Black Box, and she put that idea together maybe some 18, 20 years ago. So that's how long it took her to get it on the air. She met Dr. Colin, who wanted to produce that idea as a podcast. And then when they realized what they had, they thought, let's try and do it as a television show. I met Tracy through my daughter. She called my daughter and asked her would I do the pilot of Inside the Black Box. When she told me what it was, which is having actors of some note come on and talk about their experiences within the business, and then work with young actors in terms of, in some way, instructing them in terms of the craft, I thought, what a great idea. So I did the pilot. Tracy and I became closer friends. She then said she was looking for an actor who had a production company who would be willing to back the show. I said I would be more than willing to do that. And then we got started. And the idea was exactly what you said. The idea was to not do inside the actor studio. It was not to bring actors on and simply have them sit there and tell them about your career. I mean, the things that used to bother me about Inside the Actor Studio, as informative as it was, and James Lipton was very clever in terms of his little 8x10 cards and so forth, but the impression was that those students in front of them, that most of them would end up being like the actor that was being taught, whether it was Robert De Niro or whomever it was. And Inside the Black Box, our thing was, in order for anything to happen for you to achieve in this career, you have to know what the skill is. You have to, like a doctor, you have to go to school. You have to figure out how to do what we do. So I wanted to do that, and so did Tracy, from two ends. One end being what experienced actors would tell them when they came on for interviews within the show, and then to turn that around and give these young actors the opportunity to work with these experienced actors, and then talk about what that work was. So it was really a way of advancing younger actors more than our sort of interviewees, if you will, on how to have a career. Because some of that talk was about how to save money, how to deal when the times are not so good and you're in between gigs, So we really were trying to not only entertain with the interviews, because those stories were fantastic, but also instruct.
So you bring up something that is incredibly important to our culture, our stories, and that is the mentorship that you were providing, talking about the how to get through the times that are not so good with these young actors. Can you speak to some particular times that you overcame struggle as an actor, or times that you had to advocate for yourself in situations that may not have been so favorable? I would imagine maybe you share some of those types of areas of advice with them as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were, because we talked about all kinds of things. We talked about the fact that just being Black, we are not a monolith. Being Black means different things to different Black people. And so that's how they approach their lives, and that's how they approach their work. I talked about the fact that when I was coming up, one of the other reasons I didn't do bad guys was because there seemed to be a real kind of, what word am I looking for? A lack of care in terms of whatever these Black actors. I auditioned for something, and when I received the audition, it was for a 60-year-old Black man. At the time, I must have been 30, maybe. And so I went in to the audition and I said, what does this 60-year-old man and I have in common that you thought you want me to read this part? And the producer director said, because you're both Black, at which point I put the sides down and walked out of the room. So I would talk to them about things like that. I would talk to them about the fact that there was this very prominent director who was holding auditions for a film that he was directing. A Black actor went in, and he, after listening to this actor read, said, can't you just make it more Black? There was an actor who had a really deep voice, very articulate actor, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful actor. I'll tell you, it was Reggie Cathy. And he said, be more Black, you sound white, blah, 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 blah. Reggie came out and told me what this director said. When I went in, I did not audition, but I kind of grilled him. I said, who are you to decide what Blackness is? What do you know about it? Where are you from? And I don't think you know anything about it at all, if I think about it. And then left. So advocacy was something we were also teaching these students, that from the very get, you have to be able to stand up for yourself, because some people may not treat you very well. And they will tell you you should be grateful for the opportunity to have the job. And the retort for that is, that's true, and you should be grateful for the talent that I'm bringing to that job. So there was I went through a lot of those kinds of things as a young actor. In fact, that's the reason I left school, was I couldn't get a decent part in university theater. And then when a part did come up that I thought I could play, the director told me that, no pun intended, but I would color the role, at which point, I was a junior in college, at which point I just said, well, then I'm done here. If I have to deal with this kind of stuff, I'd rather try it and get paid for it at the very least. So yes, there were lots of moments for me as a young actor coming up where I had to advocate for myself, where I had to be clear what I wanted and what I didn't want. And those were the kinds of things we were trying to impart to these young students in Inside the Black Box.
Joe, what kept you going? What kept you going?
Well, what do they say about fools? I had great teachers. Despite the fact that they were white and I was Black, they were incredible teachers. And they taught me how to be and how to strive to be a good actor and a better actor. And that's what kept me going. I knew what I wanted. I knew what I didn't want. I knew to what extent I was willing to go to get what I wanted. Um, uh, and that's what got me through. You just have to simply understand that um, in this business, the word no uh, is very large. People would rather say no than say yes because they might be making a mistake. Um, and it's easier to, strangely enough, it's easier to throw something away than to actually take care of it. So it's all those things that kept me going. They taught me really well.
So as we begin to wind down our conversation, we learned what kept you going to get to this point. And now I want to talk about what inspires you about this next generation of actors and entertainment industry in general. The energy that I see when I watch Inside the Black Box is incredible on all sides. What excited you about that opportunity and the rest of Hollywood, what we have coming down the pipe in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, a lot of my career was spent trying to, if a young director, for instance, said he's got a film that he wanted to do and would I do a small part or whatever, more than likely I said yes, because I would want to be there to help out as much as I could. And a lot of that idea was Inside the Black Box. What can I do to help these young people? And the young actors that I see coming up, some of them are truly exciting, have something to say. They will be, given where we are now politically, it will be interesting to see how they get from point A to point B, because things like diversity and equality and inclusion are being sort of pushed off the map. So we'll see how Hollywood, in fact, responds to that kind of thing. But I think these young actors that I've seen, that I've met, they will push through. They will push through.
How would you like to be remembered yourself when it's all said and done, and you hang up your hat here in Hollywood? What is Joe Morton's legacy? How would you like to be remembered?
I've been asked that obviously question a lot. I never know how to respond to it. I always think that I know what I've done, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how other people took it. So I could say to you, yes, I'd like to be known as, first and foremost, a decent human being, a really, really good actor, and someone who tried to help other people along the way. I guess those are the things that I guess. Oh, and a fairly decent musician. So those are the things I'm hoping people will remember when I am no longer on the planet.
Well, and you are very modest with the fairly decent musician reference. So we'll leave that there and encourage people to watch out for that Joe Morton if they have not discovered Joe Morton, the musician. With regards to the way you recognized how this political climate is making things challenging for all of us on all levels, can you talk about the role that you see the NAACP having in this political climate, the NAACP Image Awards supporting Black creatives, and how you think the organization and the awards might play a role in the ongoing social conversation surrounding Black culture?
I think the NAACP in general, the organization will be, it's not that it's stopped doing what it does, but I think there will be greater challenges. I think what's happening to Hispanics across the country in terms of being, deported or whatever is something that the NAACP should get involved in. I think the idea of birth control, especially when it has something to do with Black women in this culture, and birthing, in fact, should be something that the NAACP should get involved in. I mean, I think the awards part of the NAACP is what all really kind of substantial organizations do, which is to find a way to come together as artists in general and celebrate who we are as a culture. And you know, there's really no true difference between the Oscars, the Emmys, and the NAACP awards. The difference might be the tone of the audience in terms of color, but the idea of celebrating who you are as a community, who you are as a culture, who you are as a culture who really wants to put forward not just what other people think of who we are, but what we think we are, and find opportunities to tell those stories and write that music or book or children's stories or whatever, but find ways to talk about all those different things. Sanity might be something that's going to be hard for a lot of people to hold on to these days, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to make everybody crazy. What was the beginning of that question? I was thinking something specific.
As we part ways this morning, any parting thoughts about the
political climate?
Yes, the political climate that we find ourselves in, as you mentioned.
It's going to be a very strange world. 70 million people voted for a man who is all about being a bully and punishment and whatever he can do. He's a man who does not like black or brown people and has made that as clear as possible. So I think there's going to be a lot of struggles in terms of just what we were talking about before, diversity, equality, and inclusion. I think that it is an opportunity for artists to speak up, whether they are musicians or actors or directors, whomever, but we have now opportunities to talk about the things that we think make us as a nation, the democracy that we keep sort of bragging about. Democracy is a very difficult thing to hold together, and it will be more difficult now that we have an authoritarian in the White House. So I think going forward, we have opportunities as artists to speak out in the most elegant ways possible against the craziness that we may be facing.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the Our Culture, Our Stories podcast are those of the individual hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies or positions of the NAACP or any affiliated organizations.